Hello, people of the internet. I thought I would give you a sneak preview of Fallen Ward, and I'll just read you about the first 2 pages. Chapter 1. Savan knew, intellectually, that people were anxious to get back to their city. That made perfect sense to her, and she felt the same way. But it still took her by surprise when Darren sent a message to her and requested that she come to the strategy meeting to be held in the next hour. Raid and drought, but they'd barely won the battle at Converse last night. Savan would have thought that people would take at least 2 days to rest up and take stock before planning the assault on Goldschmidt. Or at least, Darren's would give time for everyone to finish breakfast. But apparently, she was the only one that thought that way. Darren's was still camped out in the main taproom of the tavern, only this time he had commandeered more tables, probably to accommodate the influx of people. When Savan entered the room, her eyes automatically scanned the area, counting heads. Her own people were already there: Rune, Wolf, Tran, Faye, Markle, Conley, and interestingly enough, Gray. She blinked at seeing him. Gray had never been a part of the planning sessions before, for the simple reason that he was not a fighter. Even she was usually invited just because it was mostly her men that were the commanders, and as guildmaster, it would be rude to not inform her. As she wound her way through the tables and to the side, where all of her guild sat, Savan glanced at the rest of the room. Emily, Darren's wife, was at the head table with her husband, Lyra sitting at her side. Hyun Woo and Ru Jin Ho were on the opposite side of the table of their students, as well as a few other men that Savan recognized as being the main enforcers of Blackstone. 2 men she didn't recognize, but she did know the guild crest on their sleeves. Silvermoon. They must be the commanders of Hammond's enforcers, then. From the looks of things, it seemed that she was the last to arrive, as Savan couldn't think of a single person they could be missing. Sliding into a seat between Wolf and Gray, she leaned closer to her childhood friend and asked in a low tone, "Gray, why are you here?" "Wolf asked me to come," Gray responded, brow furrowed in bemusement. Apparently, he wasn't entirely clear on why he was there either. Hearing them, Wolf murmured for their ears, "Gray knows the land around Goldschmidt better than anyone else here, and I have a notion or two about path-making that might make our job easier. I want to run by him." Ah. Well, that made total sense. Gray did indeed know the land better than anyone, including Darren's, as he had to know every nonce of the land to work his paths. Not to mention the dozens of times he had dug around in the soil so he could build new paths. If Savan had been thinking, she'd have invited him herself. Darren stood and cleared his throat, gaining their attention. "Everyone's here, I believe? Good, good. This might be somewhat premature, as we just won a battle yesterday, but I want us to start working on the plan to retake Goldschmidt." "You are not overly hasty," Hyun Woo assured him calmly. "To retake a well-fortified city like Goldschmidt, we will need much time and preparation." Well, true, they likely did. Darren seemed relieved no one was going to argue that point with him, and gave Hyun Woo a grateful look before moving on. "Let's start with introductions, as I think this might be a first meeting for some. These are my commanders, Talik and Rumahor." Savan was personally pleased to see both men, as she hadn't seen Rumahor since the bridge incident at Quig, or Talik since that last desperate escape from Goldschmidt. It relieved her to know they were both fine. From Silvermoon, this is Jonathan Glass and Gaurav Hasur. They have been invaluable help to us, and have volunteered to stay at least long enough to reclaim Goldschmidt. Jonathan Glass had that nice man look to him. Not particularly tall, fair hair, glasses perched on his nose. He looked more like a scholar than a fighter, but the solid build to his arms suggested that looks were very deceiving. He had the rank of a man enforcer and was handpicked for this battle by Hammond, then he must be very, very good. He ducked his head in greeting, but didn't say a word. Gaurav Hasur absolutely must hail from the very southern edge of Rabarge, with that dark-toned skin and jet-black hair. He had a wonderful smile, though, which he flashed at the table in large. From his height and build, Savan was fairly sure he could tackle a raging boar and come out on top. "Pleasure," Gaurav said, voice pleasant and soothing. Darren's kept going around the table, introducing the rest. He finished with, "Now, that out of the way, I am now taking any suggestions that seem viable. Hyunwoo Shi? Rujin Hoshi? Is capturing Goldschmidt possible with the forces we have? Instead of answering, Hyunwoo turned an expectant look on his students. Her enforcers shared looks between them, not out of pure uncertainty, but more like, are you going to answer that, or should I? In the end, it was Faye that turned to Darren's and assured him, we can. It will take cunning on our parts, but we can. The trick will be to lure as many men out of the city as possible, Tran added. We don't want a pitched battle on top of the walls like we had here in Converse. If it came to that, we really don't have the necessary manpower to win. But if we can trick them outside of the city, then we have a solid chance of winning. All of the non-strategists at the table listened in growing confusion, but it was Darren's that voiced the obvious question. And how do we lure them out? I would think only an idiot would leave fortified walls when an army comes knocking. The essential point in order to bring down the defenses of any stronghold is, Hyunwoo held up an illustrative finger, to block them from receiving one essential element. Savan blinked. Just one? Just one.